the right course. Bhagavan, O Great One, Vadet, may kindly enlighten now us. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Vidura said, O great sage, everyone in this world engages in fruitive activities to obtain happiness, but one finds neither satiation nor mitigation of distress. On the contrary, one is only aggravated by such activities. Please, therefore, give us directions on how one should live for real happiness. Purport. Vidura asked Maitreya some common questions, which was not originally his intention. Uddhava asked Vidura to approach Maitreya Muni and inquire into all the truths concerning the Lord, his name, fame, qualities, form, pastimes, entourage, etc. And thus when Vidura approached Maitreya, he should have asked only about the Lord. But out of natural humility, he did not immediately ask about the Lord, but inquired into a subject which would be of great importance to the common man. A common man cannot understand the Lord. He must first know the real position of his life under the influence of the illusory energy. In illusion, one thinks that he can be happy only by fruitive activities. But what actually happens is that one becomes more and more entangled in the network of action and reaction and does not find any solution to the problem of life. There is a nice song in this connection. Because of a great desire to have all happiness in life, I built this house. But unfortunately, the whole scheme has turned to ashes because the house was unexpectedly set on fire. It's a very sad song. The law of nature is like that. Everyone tries to become happy by planning in the material world, but the law of nature is so cruel that it sets fire to one's schemes. The fruitive worker is not happy in his schemes, nor is there any satiation of his continuous hankering for happiness. Om Agyanatimarandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Swapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Namo Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Tirtha Swami Niti Namane Namaste Krishna Padaya Prabhupada Shritatmane Shri Gora Karuna Shakti Bhakti Tirtha Iti Namane Namo Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. The verse again. Vidura said, O great sage, everyone in this world engages in fruitive activities to attain happiness, but one finds neither satiation nor the mitigation of distress. On the contrary, one is only aggravated by such activities. Please therefore give us directions on how one should live for real happiness. When we get verses like this, these are a wake-up verses. These are verses that hit home hard. These are reality check verses. They bring us to a reality and dissipate the illusion of the material world. These are the type of verses that when one reads it, they actually question what life is all about. Vidura was a great devotee. He had asked Uddhava to please instruct him about the pastimes and the qualities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna. And Uddhava directed him to inquire from Maitreya Muni. Maitreya Muni had heard these things directly from Uddhava. So here Vidura had approached Maitreya, and instead of asking these questions, instead he started with this question. Everybody's searching for happiness. Everybody works really hard looking for happiness, but could not find happiness. In fact, they only find distress. In fact, all their attempts, they only become aggravated. And therefore, please give us directions on how one should live for real happiness. In doing so, Srila Prabhupada mentions that Vidura is asking for the benefit of everybody else in the assembly, as well as everybody else to come in the future. Because unless one knows this question, it's going to be very hard to make a connection to understand who the Supreme Lord is. Vidura, when we look at Vidura's life, it gives this statement and his position in this conversation even much more meaning. Vidura is in this situation because he made a choice in his life to leave a very difficult situation. He was living in the palace of the Kauravas. And although he saw things very clearly, although he was a great devotee, although he was detached and trying to give good instructions to his brother, Dhritarashtra, and to his nephew, Duryodhana, they would ridicule him. They would consider him to be advice of somebody of a lower social order. They disrespected him. They made him feel inferior, inadequate. And he saw the atrocities that were actually taking place and was trying to mitigate them. He did his very best. But when he saw that this situation was hopeless, he decided to seek out the Lord's shelter exclusively. So he went on pilgrimage. And here he is, inquiring to gain further depth and understanding into transcendental life. This is the proper example of moving through the process of renunciation, vanaprast into sannyas. Now, his renunciation was not premature. The Bhagavad Gita warns us about this renunciation. We shouldn't just renounce because things are troublesome or out of fear. This is renunciation in the mode of passion. It leads not to enlightenment, but to degradation. One should not renounce out of illusion. because that is in the mode of goodness. Renunciation in the mode of, that's renunciation in the mode of ignorance. Renunciation in the mode of goodness is performing one's duty because it ought to be done for the benefit of others, offering the fruits of one's activities to the Supreme Lord. That's renunciation in the mode of goodness. But if one is situated in the proper ashram, as Vidura was, and he sees that situation is just too entangling, it's too difficult, these are arrangements by the Supreme Lord to step away and take shelter of the Supreme Lord. This is different than somebody who's 25 years old and they run into some difficulty in their relationship. And then they say, okay, I'm going to renounce and move away and take full shelter of the Lord, and I'm going to go, to some ashram and live. And then 6 months later, they're back involved in another relationship with a child on the way. That is not the situation that we're looking at here with Vidura. That's the example. That other example is the example of renunciation in the mode of passion, which ultimately leads to degradation. Krishna warned Arjuna of premature renunciation on the battlefield. But Vidura's situation where he said, I just had enough of this. I'm taking shelter of the Lord. And here he is. And what is he going to do with that information? He's going to actually bring it back to help deliver his brother, Dhritarashtra, and help him leave his life in an auspicious way. So we need to become convinced of this principle, that this, regardless of how hard we work in this world, our happiness will not be achieved by the things that we acquire. And it's a hard one to really soak in, because oftentimes philosophically we may say, well, that makes a lot of sense, and I sure can share that with somebody else. But when I have to actually apply it into my own life, maybe I'm not sure. The world is full of people, in fact, everybody, that wake up every day, they go to work to support their families, to give themselves a better life, to provide. This is happening all over. Perform your fruitive activities to get the fruits and enjoy the happiness. But despite everybody searching for happiness, working very hard to earn a living, is happiness always the result? It's not. In our country alone, mental health issues, depression, the field of psychology to understand the mind and why people are having such troubles continues to rise. Suicides, dissatisfaction, understanding that the dream, which is really an illusion, that one can actually become secure and satisfied in a world that's constantly changing, becomes more and more understood, that we cannot find happiness here. When we understand that this place, as the Bhagavad Gita explains, is a place of dukkhalayam ashashvatam, temporary and full of miseries, we can then begin to ask the question, what am I doing here? And how is it that I can escape this situation? And that's what Srila Prabhupada says in this purport, that one has to first ask this question, and understand what is our position? What is our life? Who am I? And what am I doing here in this world? How are the modes of material nature affecting me, and how am I reacting to them? Then when we couple that with knowledge of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, things begin to make sense because we're presented with an alternative. We're presented with our true nature, our true life. And we can then begin to connect with that. This song that Srila Prabhupada presents us with, said it was a sad song. Must have been a country western song. Country western songs are known for their sadness. There are these people that, are more or less out in the wilderness. They're traveling, trying to set up, their towns and villages, and they made these songs, oftentimes in despair. And then you fast forward that to modern day, and you get the same type of situations. But a lot of songs are longings, or they're, a breakup of a relationship, or the loss of a loved one, and reflecting back on that. It's a reflection of that this world is not all that we try to make it, and that there's sadness there. They say if you play a country western song backwards, what do you get? You get your dog back, you get your truck back, you get your house back, you get your girlfriend back, or you get your boyfriend back. Because these songs are all about loss. So this song, because of a great desire to have all happiness in life, I built this house. But unfortunately, the whole scheme has turned to ashes because the house was unexpectedly set on fire. Now, we all may not have had our homes, our residences, our apartments set on fire and lost everything. But the law of material nature is such that the plans we make in this world are only temporary and will eventually be burned to ashes. If we go to the ocean along the seashore, we see that the tide sometimes is low and sometimes the tide is high. And when the tide is low, children with their families, they play games and they build these sand castles. And they get the molds and they pack the sand. You can't do this. You can only do this at the place on the beach where the tide is low, because that's where the sand is both, it has both water and it's dense. If you take dry sand and you try to build a sand castle, it just collapses because there's no friction amongst the particles. There's no cohesion that actually helps the sand particles stay together. So it's only possible to build it when the tide is low. The sand is wet and firm. But you build these castles, and you spend hours building these castles. And then 6 hours later, the tide comes in and washes it all away. All the hard work, all the fun gets destroyed by the waves of time. Shishi Gornitai ki jai. Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Maharani ki jai. Shishi Radha Sharad Bihari ki jai. By the waves of time, these sandcastles come down. And these waves, lifetime after lifetime, we try to establish ourselves, try to establish our happiness on a foundation that will eventually fail. Our dreams washed away. Now, we have to have a realistic expectation of this. There is the immediate vision that we're living in now, and then there's a long-term vision of how we are to actually see life and the purpose of it. To stop our occupations, to stop our duties, and just say, okay, if that's the case, I'm just going to give everything up. That may not be achievable for you. And some people in their situations, they may say, with this information, I'm going to completely and fully surrender unto Krishna. That is wonderful if one can do it. But if one is not in that situation or place in life, one can still achieve the same consciousness by dedicating one's activities to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. How can one find satisfaction in life? In a place where satisfaction is very hard to find because things are temporary and distress is all around us. The answer to that is by satisfying. We can find satisfaction in satisfying the Supreme Lord. By engaging our lives in the service of the pleasure of Krishna, we can find satisfaction. And this takes me to the third chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. When I was reading this verse, it made me think of Krishna's description of lust in the Bhagavad Gita. This is from Bhagavad Gita 3:37. I'm going to just disconnect this real quick. Stop sharing my screen here. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "It is lust only, Arjuna, which is born in contact with the mode of material passion and later transformed into wrath, and which is the all-devouring sinful enemy of this world." Srila Prabhupada says, "Then again, when lust is unsatiated," here's the word satiation, is unsatiated, it turns into wrath, and wrath is transformed into illusion, and illusion continues the material existence. Therefore, lust is the greatest enemy of the living entity, and it is lust only which induces the pure living entity to remain entangled in the material world. Wrath is the manifestation of the mode of ignorance. These modes exhibit themselves as wrath and their other corollaries. If therefore the mode of passion, instead of being degraded into the mode of ignorance, is elevated into the mode of goodness by the prescribed method of living and acting, then one can be saved from the degradation of wrath by spiritual attachment. So this idea that our desires for gain, this is lust. Lust is the transformation of our love for Krishna when we apply it to ourselves. When we apply that same energy for the satisfaction of Krishna, it is no longer lust, it is love. So Krishna continues, and he gives the example that this lust can be seen as fire covered by smoke, by a mirror covered by dust, or the embryo covering the womb. Sometimes the degree of lust is so dense that one can't see beyond, and they're just trapped in this consciousness. It's said that the human form of life, one can actually see beyond it. So that's considered to be fire covered by smoke. When you see smoke, you can also see the fire, or at least there's an indication that fire is there. So in this human form of life, we're given the opportunity to revitalize our lost Krishna consciousness. Sometimes human form of life becomes so degraded that it becomes almost impossible. And therefore, we hear, Srila Prabhupada talk about a lot of times the activities that we're experiencing in human life are really on the animalistic platform. Because when one comes to the human form of life, the special quality is that one can inquire into the absolute truth. Fire, dust covering a mirror. That is the example of like animal life, where there's still some consciousness and relationships that exist. And then finally, you have the life of immovable beings, like the plant life. That is considered to be like the embryo covered by the womb, which the embryo can't see outside of the womb. They can't see the light of day. Krishna continues, the wise living entity's pure consciousness becomes covered by this eternal enemy in the form of lust, which is never satisfied and which burns like fire. So you can't, this idea of satiation, and that's the mistake we make in this world, is that we think by pouring more fuel on the fire, we're actually going to put the fire out. My desire will be satisfied once I get this amount of money, or once I get a new home, once I get that extra car, once I get the promotion. And this may give temporary relief to our agitation, but then it comes back up again. If you ever pour fuel on the fire, and it's only instantaneous. When you pour enough fuel on the fire, it actually goes down, and then it comes roaring back. Because it's a liquid, it kind of suffocates it a little bit, but then boom, it comes up really, really stronger. So feeding into these desires without any type of regulation will actually continue to grow this material network of desires, which will grow stronger and stronger. Where is this lust? Where can it be found? Krishna tells us, the working senses, the intelligence, and the mind. So basically, our gross and subtle bodies, this lust can be found all over. Well, what do we do about it? Krishna says, we can curb this great symbol of sin by regulating the senses and thus destroy the knowledge, and we can thus slay the destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. Knowing oneself to be transcendental to the material senses, the mind and intelligence, one can then steady the mind by deliberate spiritual intelligence, known as Krishna consciousness, and thus by spiritual strength, conquer the insatiable enemy known as lust. So knowledge is required, transcendental knowledge. This is called Sambandha Jnana. Who am I? Who is Krishna? What is material nature? And what is our relationship? the triangle of Bhagavan, Jiva, and Prakriti. Krishna, the living entities, and nature. The relationship between Krishna and the living entity is often understood. We look at God and say, God is great. We should worship God. He is the creator. He is all good. But the relationship between God and material nature, we also have to understand. This is Krishna's nature. And our real testament to really developing our relationship with that Supreme Lord is how we see the Prakriti, is how we see material nature. If we see material nature as a means to satisfy ourselves, and Krishna has created this material nature to fulfill our material desires, then we'll only find frustration in this world. But if we see this Prakriti, this material nature, and understand how it works under the control of Krishna, and that that is to be used in the service of Krishna for our deliverance, then we can find peace and happiness in this world. That is the lesson and the takeaway for today. When we come to the understanding that our senses, our bodies, the material desires that we have are only the cause, ultimately, of our trouble, the conclusion would be then to just stop everything, or at least give an attempt to try to stop everything. And therefore, Arjuna asked this question in the Bhagavad Gita. What is better, to just renounce everything in the world or to engage in your service? And Krishna says to engage in my service is better. You can try, but it's going to become very difficult. That path is very troublesome. But if one engages one's senses in the service of the Lord and the master of the senses, Rishikesha, Rishikenam, Sevanam, Bhaktir, Uchate, one can find satisfaction. By engaging the Prakriti in service of the Purusha, of Krishna, one can find satisfaction. But using that Prakriti for one's own service, we will find disappointment. Uddhava wanted to point this out for our benefit, for the benefit of everyone else, and that as we approach the Supreme Lord, this Sambandha Jnana, knowledge of our relationship, it's important that we have it. And then when we hear about, when we understand that, we advance to the point of Abhideya, which is, in that relationship, how do I act? What activities do I perform to ultimately achieve the goal, which is the prayojana? Krishna Prema. I will conclude right now and see if there's any questions or comments from anybody. I hope that you found this verse to be, as I did, an eye-opener, a verse that makes us reflect and question the purpose of life, and reminds us that we're not the only ones. Everyone is looking for happiness, and the happiness people are not finding is because they don't know where to look for it. And they keep looking for the same places, just turning over, opening a different door in this material world. Ultimately, it will lead to trouble. It will lead to a dead end and bring about more aggravation in people's lives. If you understand this, please share it with somebody that you feel can help them benefit from. Knowledge is for ourselves, just as Vidura had asked this question for the benefit of others. We should also be thinking about how people that are lost, how we can give this knowledge to somebody else. And it may come at the most unlikely, unplanned time. Could be the person sitting next to you on the bus. Could be a family member that calls you for something else. Could be a stranger. Could be a coworker. Could be a fellow devotee who's going through a difficult situation. But we should be ready to be able to share this. Because this knowledge that Vidura is asking Maitreya, and what Maitreya is going to answer, is knowledge that is revolutionary and that can change our trajectory in life. It changed my trajectory. It's changed many of your trajectories. It has the ability to revolutionize the standard of living if we're willing to open ourselves up to give it to somebody else. Hare Krishna. Okay. Anybody like to say any concluding words? Oh, say Aditi first and then Prabhu. Mhm. Yeah, how to take them to that. So a person who is, they come to, they can at least wrap their heads around the idea that, you know, this world is entangling. It's going to cause me, difficulty and distress. But yet they don't necessarily believe in God or think that that is the solution to it. Right. Right. Or at least see that devotional service to Krishna is the solution to this entanglement that we're in. So how do you take them from that place to another? And that's a lot of people, they do, so your reaction can be of different types. Some people are, they'll continue to look in material nature for their solutions. I just have to make, better decisions. And that could be true. You may have to make some better material decisions in your life. But even with those better material decisions, are you going to find satisfaction? Now, and we can just point to the fact that it's well documented how some of the most successful, famous, wealthy individuals are the most lonely, insecure people on the earth. There's no correlation to fame, wealth, strength, and happiness. Um, and oftentimes when you have these things, you actually live a life of fear because you're afraid that you're going to lose these things. It could be taken away. So you're always trying to build more wealth, gain greater security in the fear that you could lose some. And then also you begin to try to, so this becomes the goal. Okay, I failed, so I'm going to just try to open another door. Again, this may be necessary. You may have to make some wiser decisions. Oftentimes, it requires us falling into a place of distress, um, where we feel that there is no hope. Krishna says there's different types of people that come to him. The distressed, the seeker of wealth, the inquisitive, and those that are in search of knowledge. So certain people out of frustration, I've tried everything and just nothing seems to work. Could be a family, marital issue, could be a job issue, could be a real estate issue, could be a health issue. I would just say, I have no other recourse. I have no other place to go. I'm going to try you, Krishna. I'm going to try you, God. I may not even know who Krishna is. Please answer these questions. And when we do that, Krishna then opens the door for us. Now, we may come to that understanding, or somebody may kind of give us a little nudge by giving them a Bhagavad Gita, or maybe by observing our behavior. If we're trying to practice these teachings, and a coworker sees us and says, "How'd you handle that situation so calmly and coolly?" And then you can explain to them about self-discipline. Now, I could get really upset right now, but what good would it really do? Would it really help solve the problem, or would it make actually things worse? And this is how I go through my decision making. They say, "Well, how did you do?" Like, it's interesting. Wow, I would like to actually be able to do that too. I admire you for that. This is the idea of being the example. Not necessarily to say, well, you got to read Bhagavad Gita 434 and it'll tell you, but live that example. Now you can give them a Bhagavad Gita when the time is right. But by being that example, and when people see that in our lives as aspiring devotees, those that are practicing Vaidhi Bhakti, that we're able to demonstrate detachment and find happiness in that detachment from situations. That will also give people a curiosity, at least. If they haven't hit that kind of that rock bottom where they say, I just got to go to God because no one else can help me. But there can be a place in between where a person develops a curiosity and says, I would like to have some of what she has. I'd like to have a little bit of what you have. Can you tell me a little bit about that? And then you can be a vessel. Does that answer your question? Any follow-up? Any follow-up question to that? Okay. All right. Thank you for the question. Yes, sir.
Thank you for the explanation. Actually, I heard that the Uddhav Gita, like Bhagavad Gita, is the dialogue between the Sri Krishna and the Arjuna. Uddhav Gita is the dialogue between the Vidura and Uddhav, or the Uddhav and Sri Krishna.
And Krishna, Uddhava and Krishna. Yeah, it's in the later canto of the Bhagavatam.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. Uddhava Gita, yeah. Yeah. It's a great conversation. We got a glimpse of it. in the previous chapters, but it's covered in its entirety later. Okay, we can stop right now. Pray that everybody has a wonderful Krishna conscious day. And thank you for tuning in and for your attention, for your questions. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.